Good morning, everyone. I am Rev Wendy Silvers, and you have arrived at the Awakened Mother podcast. Weekly, uncensored dialogues, uncensored, raw, unfiltered dialogues with leading edge, visionary, spiritual teachers, moms and dads on the ground, people that are engaged and immersed in work that is in support of the empowerment of moms and kids thriving. And today, I'm just so happy that I get to share with you my dear friend and colleague, TJ Woodward. He is an international speaker and educator. He entertains audiences, as you will see. He is magnetic. He is so deep. He is conscious. He is giving. He is just brilliant. He provides dynamic talks and training. He is an addiction treatment specialist. And I felt so called to have TJ on the Awakened Mother podcast because these past 3 years, especially the ones where we were in house arrest, really contributed to a lot of flaring up of addictive patterns and behaviors, and we'll dive into that more. But he created conscious recovery, which is an evolutionary, revolutionary approach to healing from addictive patterns. He's created programs and he works with recovery centers, and he does curriculum designing and clinical trainings. In 2018, he was given the distinct honor of being selected as a thought leader on wholehearted.org, along with Miriam Williamson, Brene Brown, one of my favorites, Dr. Gabor Mate, and Mark Lundholm. In 2017, he launched the Conscious Recovery Method. It is a groundbreaking and effective approach to viewing and treating addiction. It moves beyond simply treating behaviors and symptoms and addressing the underlying root causes and that drive these destructive patterns, while providing clear steps for letting go of false beliefs, core false beliefs. We call them error of belief that lead to addictive tendencies. So he works with residential and outpatient interactive groups and spiritual counseling sessions. And it is a method and a program that can be implemented in any existing treatment program and is intended to enhance holistic integrated care. TJ is also the founding minister of Agape Bay Area in Oakland, which was the first satellite community center of the Agape International Spiritual Center in LA, which is where I am affiliated. And that is where Reverend Dr. Michael Bernard Beckwith is the senior minister and founder of Agape. And TJ was ordained by Reverend Michael in 2018. He's also hosted the Conscious Being radio show on Unity Online Radio and the Awakened Living TV show in San Francisco. TJ published his first book, Conscious Being, Awakening to Your True Nature, in 2015, and his second book, Conscious Recovery, A Fresh Perspective on Addiction, was released in December 2017. Conscious Creation, 5 Steps to Embracing the Life of Your Dreams, was released in 2021. In addition to his 3 books, he has also authored 4 workbooks. 1 on addiction, 1 on mental health, 1 on eating disorders, and the latest is on teens. In 2010, he graduated from the Spiritual Development Program, and in 2011, graduated from the Leadership Development Program, both at Unity Institute. This man has street cred, folks, so help me welcome TJ Woodward.
Thank you, Rev Wendy. I just like that. That sounds like someone who's really busy. I'm like, wow, I feel energized just hearing all of that because, I used to think that work was work.
Right.
And then I realized that when I discovered true purpose and meaning, work is energizing. So the more you were saying that I've done over the last few years, the more energized I felt. And if there's nothing else we can say today that's profound, that is because I used to feel so depleted by my work.
Yeah.
That's a whole conversation, but I'm so grateful.
Yeah, I'm so grateful that you're here. We had the joy of dialoguing on Friday for Agape's spiritual community gathering, which I have the honor of being the host minister every 4 to 6 weeks. So it's just such a lively and incredibly enriching and enlivening conversation.
Mhm.
And I spoke a lot about conscious recovery. So having been in the 12-step recovery movement for approximately the same time, I really appreciate this the radical approach to recovering from addiction that you provide. So in a nutshell, would you share, I'm joking because it's not something you could just like in a nutshell, because it's such a lived experience. Will you describe how it came to be that you created conscious recovery, your path, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, beautiful. Well, I wanted to start with what makes conscious recovery slightly different.
Mhm.
And that is that we view the person who is either struggling with an addiction or in recovery as a whole and perfect being rather than fundamentally flawed or broken. And
Mhm.
that may sound, in some ways, it's like, well, of course. And in other ways, we look at many of the recovery models, many of the treatment modalities, many of the ways clinicians are trained. The way people view someone with an addiction is through this lens of brokenness. And that fundamental difference is very simple and very profound. The
Mhm.
reason that it came to be is that when I was about a year to a year and a half sober, I wanted to kill myself. I didn't want to be alive anymore. And I hadn't addressed any of the underlying issues of
Mhm.
my addiction. And I was just so grateful to be sober my first year of sobriety. It was like, oh my gosh, no hangovers. I have this great community. I'm actually showing up to work. I was young. I'm 20 when I got sober. So, sort of these basic life skills had not been something that I had really embraced too much, right? I was
Yeah.
struggling with showing up to work and paying my bills. So, um, when I was around 18 months sober and roughly, all of the things I hadn't yet addressed were showing up. And I didn't at the time realize I had the inner resources to address them. And so I
Mhm.
didn't know how to live. And I met a woman who was a student of New Thought and Eastern philosophy and just beautiful, enlightened being who introduced me to and walked me through a completely different way of viewing myself and recovery, starting with the foundation that there's a place within me that's perfect, not that I'm
Mm.
fundamentally flawed or broken. And that momentary shift changed the trajectory of my life. And over the years, over the last 36 years, has become conscious recovery.
Mm. I love that. It's so true. It is a radical detour from being broken and damaged.
Yeah.
I've worked with so many people who describe themselves as being damaged or damaged goods.
Mhm.
And it hurts my heart when I hear that. And I know that there was a time in my own life when I felt like, oh my gosh, what else do I need to do? What else? And so it's so helpful to hear about how you were introduced to the concept and to the knowing that you're not broken. You're
Right.
broken open. You've been brought to your knees, which Rumi says that when the world brings you to your knees, you're in a great position to pray.
That's right.
And right. So you were led. Was it Reverend Helen or was it
Mary Helen is her
Mary
name.
Helen? Yes. Yes. And she led you into this coursework, really, but it's the inner coursework.
That's right.
And so that's the piece. So if you are somebody who is struggling with addictive patterns, one of the passages that I read from TJ's book that I so resonate with, and I'm going to read it again because it speaks to uh, so many people don't recognize, or they have such self-loathing and self-hatred toward themselves because of particular patterns. So I just want to read this because it speaks a lot to the work that we both do. The Outer Focus Life. It is on page 5. It's at the very beginning of this gorgeous book. And it says, when we look at addiction, we might automatically think of dependence on drugs or alcohol. We might imagine a person who is utterly down and out, someone who has lost their job and their relationships and is destitute and homeless. While that is indeed one face of addiction, the definition I'd like to work with is much broader. Many of us live with a sense of emptiness or disconnection. We feel broken and empty inside, and we look outside ourselves for a solution. Or we're uncomfortable with what we see when we look within. If we cannot bear to be with ourselves, to look at that inner edge where our darkest feelings and memories reside, then we may turn outward for something that will seem to pull us back to safety. In any case, the pain of what's inside causes us to look outside for relief. So there's more to that paragraph, but I'll pause right there. So you've been in recovery for a period of time. You did get sober when you were very young. You've been in recovery, you've been in meetings, you start your path of inner growth and expansion. Tell us your path.
Well, I think, well, I love hearing the paragraph read because it's just so my story, right? It's so my story of feeling so damaged and broken. And so when I came into recovery, honestly, Wendy, there was a consciousness around me that was supporting that, right? They weren't saying, yes, you're damaged or broken. And yet in some ways they were. We heard things like, the root of your problem is selfishness and self-centeredness, right? And I was like, oh, it's true, I am a bad person, right? That's how I heard it, even if that's not what they were saying, right? And I'm really aware right now, and one thing that came through in my meditation this morning was the idea of the emergence of feminine energy on planet Earth, or maybe I should say a re-emergence, or
re-emergence,
or in some circles, an emergence. It might be new for some of us, but what do I mean by that? And I promise it ties into what we're talking about, because the circles that I was introduced to in my early recovery felt very male. And when I talk about male and female, I'm not necessarily talking about gender. I'm talking about the energy, and I don't want to be disparaging of any energy, because all of it is useful, right? Like the divine masculine and the divine feminine, and even how we attach attributes to these genders is something we could talk about for 3 hours. For the sake of this conversation, we're going to talk about it sort of how we traditionally do, with what's traditionally male and traditionally female from an energetic perspective. So it was very traditionally male when I was like, you're broken, you're the problem, sit down, shut up. That's literally what they said. You don't know anything. Your best thinking got you here. And I felt so broken that I was like, yeah, they're right. Of course yeah, you're right. And so that whole idea was that I was going to surrender and let go of, my self-will, which was very also what we would call that sort of male driven. And when I met Mary Helen, there was a softness to her energy. There was a gentleness to her approach. She would say in her beautiful Southern accent, "Darling, you're so precious." And I honestly, Wendy, I couldn't take it in, right? So I would repel from that. And that was information for me. And at one point, I don't know if it was an event or a process, but I remember at one point thinking, she is literally the most enlightened person I've ever met. She is literally the most open-hearted person I've ever met. Her heartbreaking stories broke her heart open to a new way of being, right? Like you've said. And so at one point I thought, if she sees that I'm precious, who am I not to? She's the person I respect the most on planet Earth, and she's telling me that everyone at their core is precious. And so that's a very, very different approach than like this idea of, I think about power versus force, right? David Hawkins in his book, that we're entering and there's something emerging. And my intention with conscious recovery is to be a part of that, where we're not trying to fight or battle. We hear this language, and it's, we send people, in human consciousness, we'd say we send them to their grave, but we know we're transitioning them to the next level of existence. Using words like she lost her battle with cancer. And we're swimming in this consciousness until we wake up and realize, oh my gosh, there's a different way. Not a better way or a right way, but a different way of approaching through this more gentle, loving, and curious position, rather than like, it's more like an openness.
You just speak to my heart. I so resonate with all of that. I know I was one of the things that I've been told historically through all the different communities that I'm a part of is how hard I am on myself.
Yeah.
So there can be an invitation to really hold that harshness. And I feel as though for my own personal journey, it's softened a lot, of course, because when you do the work that we do, the intentional meditation, the prayer work, the visioning, the conscious recovery, the being responsible, the words that there's a softening
Yes.
that happens. And so I know that in my world, there's a lot of moms who are either in recovery, right, from their own addictions, or they're married to somebody or in relationship with somebody who is either active, dry, or in recovery. And they're parenting. And there's this very earnest, very genuine and earnest, sincere desire to do things differently and not pass on the same dysfunctional patterns, the same, error of thought, the same core false beliefs that they were told. And so it's so helpful to allow somebody to know that they're not bad.
Right.
Right. So do talk to me a little bit about disease. You have a disease.
I like you just threw that in there, right? Let's talk about disease. Okay, so what we're talking about here is the disease model, right? Where
Right.
sort of the party line since the mid 1930s has been, it's not a moral deficiency, it's a disease, right? And so that was a profound shift in consciousness, because before it was, you're a bad person, you're morally, literally morally deficient. That was sort of how it was viewed. And we're talking about addiction back before 1935 for the most part. And of course, the medical establishment didn't know what to do, right? They couldn't find an effective approach. And truthfully, 12-step came in, or AA came in at that time and said, what if it's a disease, right? So that was a profound shift. And now we're in the conversation, and I'm going to be careful how I say it. What if that's not the whole story? Right? Because when we talk about a disease, I hear people being told in early recovery, in treatment, in recovery circles, you can never heal. You have a chronic, lifelong illness that can never be healed. And, Wendy, you and I are students. Well, I don't even know, we're students where we're practicing, right? Practitioners of new thought. So we know that words have power and words have energy. So if we say you're chronic, like feel the energy of that. You have a lifelong illness that can never be healed. And so it was a profound shift in consciousness. And now we're saying, what if we can heal? What if the disease is not the whole story? Even if we do view it as a disease, what if that disease can be healed? Not that it's chronic and lifelong. Even if we do, if we say, I have a body, I'm not my body, then even if we do say it's a disease in the body, we say there's something stronger and more powerful than that. And that's not to negate it, that's to work with it. Right. So when we talk about she lost her battle with cancer, rather than saying that, it's like, okay, here's something that's happening in my body. How do I work with that now? Not how do I fight against it? That's a profound shift. So even if you do believe, or you have been taught, or it's true that addiction is a disease, it's not the whole story. Because, we could spend 30 minutes debating on whether it's a disease or not, but that might be centered in my ego. Instead, maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But what gets created when I say it's chronic and lifelong, it can never be healed. And what gets created is say, oh, maybe it's less important if it's a disease, and more important, how do I work with it? And can it actually be healed? And Wendy, you and I know the answer is yes. We can heal actually anything that we view as a disease. Anything, we can heal that.
Yes. Thank you for that. What I appreciate in what you're saying is when people are writhing on the ground, when somebody's in the very early stages of withdrawal, it's hard to understand that it's a physical, mental, emotional, spiritual malady. It's the unaddressed trauma that has happened to somebody that compels them to seek outside refuge from what's going on in the head. And so I really appreciate the very well-roundedness of conscious recovery and the work that I do, which would be a form of conscious recovery because it's about recovering yourself. Because if you
Right.
don't address the underlying, right, it's just like in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous where it says alcohol is but a symptom, right? So alcohol, drugs, I mean, there are drugs that we know, like crack cocaine and meth, that are completely physically addictive.
Right.
And then, so there's got to be the detoxing of that physical pattern and then address the mental, emotional, and spiritual.
Right.
You can't, and that's for me one of the frustrating experiences that I've had with people that have active patterns of addiction, I want to say, as a way of dealing with their emotional pain or their mental dysregulation. It's this idea that A, they can handle it themselves, that B, they'll just control it.
Yeah.
And that's not the solution. So what with your clients that come to you, right, and say, I got this, I'm good, I'm really good, but their teeth are really, they've done, all these things, wreaked havoc on themselves, their families, and we have this revolutionary recovery process that you created. How do you work with them? What do you do with them?
Well, there's two things that I would start with. One is, in conscious recovery, we call addiction a brilliant strategy rather than a coping mechanism. And we start with that because it is true for most of us, if not all of us, what we became addicted to in the beginning was pleasurable, right? It
Yes.
brought us the relief. So we don't want to say heroin is bad, right? Because of course we could find all the reasons to support that. When I start with someone, I start by asking, let's look at all the ways it really has been brilliant in your life, right? And then we can start to dialogue with that, because nothing could be truer or less useful than telling someone they should stop using, right? Because that really isn't effective for someone in an addiction. It's like, no kidding, right? When I've been on because I've in my recovery, I have been addicted to shopping and shopping. And if someone comes along and you shouldn't be doing that, I'm like, of course I shouldn't be, but there's something in that's compelling me,
Right.
compelling me.
Right.
And so if we can start to dialogue with it as a brilliant strategy and go back to maybe the first time of use, and it's really counterintuitive in a lot of ways, because a lot of them, again, I'm going back to a lot of the models are like, you need to stop doing that. And my heart breaks for mothers and fathers. My heart breaks for them. And at the same time, sometimes the family members are the ones that are saying, especially, let's say, to their kid, their teenage, their young adult child who is working with an addiction. It's really easy because we have fear, right? Even energetically, they shouldn't be doing that because, with heartbreaking honesty, we're watching this person potentially kill themselves. So this piece of saying it's brilliant, a mother, I've worked with mothers of I'm thinking of a client, 19-year-old using heroin, treatment 7 times. He was very much like you were describing. I'm fine. I don't know. Everyone else doesn't seem to be fine, but I'm fine with this. And the mother is like, I'm afraid you're going to die. I'm afraid you're going to die. And that was the narrative. And that fear, of course, is valid. And we honor that. The message for the 19-year-old was, I shouldn't be doing this. There's something wrong with me. Mom doesn't love me, right? And so starting with, okay, let's talk about the first time you ever used heroin. What was that like for you? Right? What was brilliant about it? What was that pull? And then, as you said, Wendy, then we become physically addicted to certain drugs, and that's a whole other layer. So once we remove the physical addiction through detox, and unfortunately, that's mostly what treatment does now. It's like, let's detox you and then give you some tools and send you on your way. But you and I both know that that is only the first step. We get the physical detox is where we start. Then, as you said, we start working with the mental, emotional, and spiritual. So that foundation that it was a brilliant strategy, we dialogue with it along with this piece that we're gently introducing. What if you're not broken? Is there a place within you that's still unharmed and unharmable? When we
Mhm.
start to work with both of those, we start to see a profound shift.
Yeah, I love that. I love that whole concept of strategy, and that it's a brilliant, because it is a strategy. It is a very creative strategy to snuff out and shut down the pain
Yeah.
and that pattern. And I especially, and then it is such a strategy because when you have kids that are bipolar, there's that self-medicating component to try and regulate the brain.
Right.
So it is a strategy to help. And I know that a couple of the kids that I worked with, unfortunately, um, their addictions, their patterns, those strategies didn't serve them. And that was their, as heartbreaking as it is, and it was, that is part of their soul path, is the only way that I can approach that.
Yeah.
And I know that there's a dynamic that happens in a family when there's somebody that is acting out. And I've often, and I use that word acting out very gingerly, because again, it's a strategy to meet an unmet need. That is strategy. And what I find, what's so always so curious to me, is that when there's one in the family, like for instance, if there's a child in the family that is exhibiting this behavior, that is using these strategies, the family becomes so focused on them that they forget, like there's this blind spot. Oh, wait, but for 40 years, every time I come home from work, I have a drink, or I light up a joint, or I'm not available for my kid, or, but it has nothing to do with me, it's them.
Right. Yeah, and there are layers to it, right? Because I think that the nuanced position is to not move into blame, right? Because
Yes,
blame is the counterpart to shame, right? So if I
absolutely.
haven't addressed my shame, which I identify as one of the three root causes of addiction. So if I'm walking around with my shame, and 100% of the clients I've ever worked with, and I can say that with heartbreaking honesty, 100% are carrying shame. And usually there's shame that's pervasive in the family, even if we haven't identified it as such. And
Mhm.
so when, if I'm a mother, which of course I'm not, but I imagine I've worked with a lot of mothers, but I imagine that when there's this, what you said is acting out, right? Brilliant strategy. Someone is, using heroin and causing harm in the world, that intensifies the shame. And
Mhm.
the unconscious way we work with shame is to blame. And that's
Yes,
that's that's the disease in our world right now. That's the pandemic. Shame is
I
the
agree.
pandemic, along with blame, right? So if I'm not willing or able to work with my shame, I'm going to point a finger at someone else and blame them, or I'm going to blame myself, which just keeps the shame in a downward spiral. So I'm broken, I act broken, I have more shame because of what I just did, and then I blame myself and go, it's downward, downward, downward spiral. And the family system, like you said, points to the person that's the most obvious. Well, I'm not the one out doing heroin, or I'm not the one out doing whatever it is, cheating, whatever that behavior
Mhm.
is. As we look at it as a system, we can gently move out of blame and into curiosity. Let's be curious about what's created this. Not
Mhm.
it's mom's fault, it's dad's fault, it's my child's fault.
Mhm.
Let's take fault and blame out of the equation and start to become curious about, because, Wendy, you and I know that it's wanting to heal. It's
Yes.
presenting because it's wanting to heal. And the opportunity is to move toward the healing, or we go into blame and keep ourselves stuck. That's kind of what's happening right now in our culture, even though I don't think it's really happening, but that's what people are saying is happening. It's not the only thing happening,
Yeah.
but there is a lot of finger pointing and blame, and that is simply a symptom of unresolved trauma and shame.
Yes, I thank you. I have this way of looking at something when it happens, and whenever I look at it as shame is definitely one of the three faces of that addictive pattern. And I think of it as there's a judgment, right? So there's the family system, there's judgment, either self-judgment or other judgment, as you so beautifully articulated in here. There's the other. Then there's victim.
Yeah.
So where am I a victim? Where are you making me a victim? Where are you? It's the you, right?
Yeah.
And then there's this entitlement piece. And it's this shouldn't be happening. You shouldn't treat, they shouldn't. It's this, and again, when I use the word entitlement, I'm not blaming. I'm not making this, I'm just saying this is the defenses.
Right.
These are the strategies that are used.
That's right.
And the invitation through conscious recovery and conscious living is to be what I call radically self-responsible.
I love it.
Which is so huge.
Yeah.
And it's the entryway. I mean, if you want to heal what you're talking about, it's that being curious, acknowledging the strategies. It's looking at the ways in which I show up in every area of my life. What am I telling myself?
Yeah. And I love where you're going with it. You didn't use the word compassion, but as you're speaking, I hear the compassion that's coming with that. We're not talking about self-criticism and blame. We're talking about self-accountability. I had a spiritual teacher once that said, my religion is I am accountable. Like, let me be accountable, but not from a place of judgment, as Wendy said, but from a place of curiosity. And you talked so eloquently about entitlement being the strategy for the shame.
Yes.
Right. The victim consciousness, you tied those together. And that's something we want to be really curious about, because what happens is we develop a sense or a belief in our own brokenness that has a frequency attached to it.
Yes.
But in conscious recovery, we call core false beliefs. Often, I am not lovable, I am not worthy, I'm not good enough, I'm broken. So if we look at I'm not lovable, or if we look at the victim consciousness, right? I am a product of being a victim. So if my core false belief is I am a victim, my strategy might be to act really entitled. I have acted really entitled in my life, and I can tell you exactly what it was managing, even when I wasn't aware of it, was that I'm not worthy.
Yes.
So usually we look at someone based on their behavior, and we even, go to therapy for 20 years or treatment 8 times, and we're looking at the behaviors, even the thoughts, the behaviors, the thoughts, the behaviors, the thoughts, and we're in this repetitive cycle. And when we can become curious about whatever the behavior is as a strategy, then we can ask, what is it managing, right? We tell people you need to manage your anger. And instead of let's send someone to anger management, we want to ask, what is the anger managing?
Yeah, masking.
It's completely different.
Yes.
What's at the root of that? And I'm always curious. I don't want to ever think I know what someone is masking or managing, but I'm always curious about the opposite. So if someone's acting entitled, I want to ask questions about the possibility that it's that they feel worthless. Right. So we want to start dialoguing, not with the strategy, but with the core false belief. That's where it gets healed. And that's the work, the deeper work that you and I do. It's the deeper work of conscious recovery. It's the deeper work at Agape, all these conscious communities that are saying it's not what's happening in the world. That's not the issue, but only 100% of the time.
Well, you said something on Friday that I really appreciated. And it reminds me of something I heard recently, that 99% of something is a bitch, but 100% of something is easy.
Right. I said,
you didn't say the bitch, I put the bitch.
I said nothing is more painful than 99% surrender. Right. That's been my journey. Right. It's like, when I first learned that the world was a hologram that was pictured by me, the projector, I was like, yeah, that's probably true 99% of the time. But there is that group of people that are just not good people. And there they are over there. It's their fault, right? So I'm like, okay, maybe it's my perception, but that 99% surrender was some of the most painful parts of my life. Because when I was just in victim consciousness and blaming the world, there was some comfort to that. I didn't have to be accountable for anything. And then as I became accountable, I'm like, oh. And then there's the, oh, wow, there's the freedom at that other
Mm,
point of surrender. And because the only surrender we really make is to understand that we're infinite beings.
yes.
And that surrender is like, oh, wow, it's not the Republican Party or the Democrat Party or it's not that. That's the collective hologram
Mhm.
based on generational stories, ideas, beliefs, and frequencies that have been passed down. And we as infinite beings can interrupt that and say, no, that's not the sacred. No is no. I'm not going to buy into the paradigm. I'm not going to watch CNN. I'm not going to watch Fox News. I'm not interested in that conversation. There
Right.
is so much love happening in the world, but the 6 o'clock news, if they even have that anymore, I'm dating myself. But the news is saying, look how horrible the world is,
Yeah.
constantly, constantly, constantly. And we have a different choice that we can make. And we only
Mhm.
make it right now, right in this
Mm,
moment.
yes, I'm with you 100%.
I know you are. Not
100%.
99%.
Not 99, 100, because I too, I know that my entitlement covered up the defensiveness, covered up that feeling like crap about myself. And so I love what you're saying, and 100%, I love the go where the love is. Go
Yes.
where be the love, not even go where the love is, be the love. And it really dovetails into what we were talking about at the top, where you talked about the emergence of the feminine.
Yeah.
Because when I hear you speak and we're having this dialogue, if do you see it's like the wave, it's like that's the feminine way. And there's times when that, the masculine, for lack of a better, is all, it's going forward. It's that very energetic forward. Not that the feminine isn't, but the feminine is this flow, this spiral. And so I hear you and I feel that feminine energy, and I appreciate it so deeply, because we are caught in this world that we are living in. The external uh, presentation
Right.
of the world
Right.
is this over here, this side, nah, nah, nah. But we're talking about the weaving.
Yeah. Imagine a world where everyone paused. Just really imagine for a moment, everyone pauses and becomes curious.
Yeah.
One of the people that I have such a great amount of respect for is my friend Zach Bush, MD.
Yeah.
He talks about curiosity all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Because that knowing, that need to know that I have the answer, that literally is the root of every problem in the world. It comes down to something so simple. I am right and you are wrong. That's the primary disease of the mind in the world. That's what
Mm-hmm.
causes all the pain and suffering, right? It is that, like, that's what causes wars. That's what causes divorce. That's what causes all the issues that we're having. So if, as each of us pause and become curious, which to me is the feminine, it's the openness, as you said. I love that, because it's moving with instead of against whatever's
Mm-hmm.
happening. And
Mm-hmm.
then if we become curious, we open up to infinite possibilities.
Mm-hmm.
And so that sacred feminine, like, we're having a conference this week in Orange County where the theme is the emergence of feminine
And the
energy,
share.
leadership.
Yes.
And yeah, and thank you for sharing that, because I'm now getting really excited about the conversation. We are exploring how, as leaders, if you look at leadership with most companies in America or the world, most governments, it's been fairly male dominated for several thousand years. I remember, I think it was David Letterman was interviewing someone, and this person was a Muslim person, and he said, what is it like not ever having had a female president in your Muslim country? And she said, how is it not ever having a female president in your country?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right. So again, we're not necessarily talking about gender here. We're really talking about this energy. And so, yeah, so this is our beautiful array of speakers. We're going to have Reverend Temple Hayes is a wonderful person in the New Thought movement. Esther
Yes.
Nicholson, she's, all of these speakers are coming together, and I love each one of them individually. My friend Mackenzie Phillips, who is phenomenal, Adriana Popescu. We're coming together to have a conversation about the emergence. We could have called it the emergence of curiosity, right? The emergence of holding space, the emergence of looking at addiction, not through the lens of brokenness, but through that lens of wholeness. So I'm super excited. It's happening in Orange County this Thursday and Friday. I know
Yes,
we
and
will be there.
I'll make sure everybody can see that. To participate and to attend, www.consciousrecovery.com/emergence. And I really appreciate that you're doing this, because I talk about, my work is about restoring the sovereignty of the mother. And it's really that energy of the mother in our world that feels so imbalanced. And it's that, but it's the deepening, it's the really tapping into that place within and getting curious and looking at the strategies and exploring, where that emerged from. Like we're talking about emergence, and it makes me think of the field being ripe, and then the emergence happens. So the field is real, folks. There is a real field in which we live, move, and have our beingness. It's there. And so universally, we have the opportunity to dial up the love, to dial up the peace, to dial up the compassion. These are not qualities outside of us. We see them outside of us, but they are inside of us.
Yes. And I love what we're talking about, because we're not talking about male and female here. We're talking about the different energies that live within each of us, and just becoming curious about what gets created when I tap into both of them. They're both really useful. I mean, in the Tibetan tradition, there's something called a dorji, which is a double dorji is supposed to balance your masculine and feminine energy. This isn't about being anti-male or anti-masculine energy. It's all really useful for me. And this is just for me. I'm not saying it for anyone else. My issue was I was running with that as the dominant energy, right? I needed to like crush it. I need to dominate. I need to figure this out. I need to make it happen. I was exhausted and depleted. My body was showing it. I was in addiction. And then as I started becoming curious about balancing those two, that's when we start to look at the divine masculine of the action springing from the intuitive, springing from love, springing from compassion, and connecting those two. I had someone say, oh yeah, I'm looking forward to your women's conference. I'm like, it's not a women's conference. That's not, I mean, we do have amazing, powerful women speaking. And this is really about, as you said, Wendy, it's about recognizing those energies within us. And the emergence of the feminine energy isn't about squashing the masculine.
Right.
It's about bringing them both forward, because we have been really male dominated for the last 2,000 years. What else is possible?
What else is possible? When we think, if we go back to basics, right? Go back to basics, and we think about in the villages, and I'm really mostly thinking about our first people. But when we go back to that, we think about the warriors. The women were inside the village. They were gathering up the herbs and the berries and taking care of the babies and doing things. And the men, the male identified men were holding this container. And so when we are in right alignment, there's such a place for both. And even those that in the communities that were referred to as two-spirit,
right? That
maybe we're in our world, we're non-binary, or to that extent, there was an acceptance. And so this is, I'm going to go out on a limb here, but that white Western mentality of I know better that you spoke about, that I have often joked to called know-it-allism.
Know-it-allism, indeed. Yeah.
Right. I know it all. I got it. The minute we move into know-it-allism, we lose. And so to a great extent, I think people don't realize the ones that are returning to regenerative farming, the ones that are planting seeds and the whole metaphor of planting seeds, but the ones that are literally hands in the dirt doing that, it's really a return.
Yeah.
It's a return to that beautiful honoring of life, which is what conscious recovery offers. This sanctity of life, returning. Now, I'm not going on to issues, but that sanctity of honoring and revering a person's journey from a place of choosing strategies that initially work, but don't sustain
Right.
into a life that works.
That's right. Beautifully said. Wow. I love that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, my dear. So are there any parting words that you would like to share? I will absolutely make sure that everyone has access to join you in Orange County this weekend. It's this Thursday and Friday. It will be glorious. I am certain.
I am certain of that as well. Yeah, I mean, I would just invite to come play with us for 2 days and playing with an awareness of what's emerging in our culture and looking at it through the lens of curiosity. And my closing words, my closing words are usually the same, and that is, if no one has told you today, you're a whole and perfect spiritual being. Because that's the message that changed my life. And so that's the message I offer all of your viewers and listeners in this moment.
So beautiful. Thank you so much, TJ. I also wanted to dive into the dialogue of what kind of pushback you may have received from being this visionary who is holding up this mirror.
So far, so good.
Yes.
We could do a whole show on that.
We should.
Yeah, I've had a couple of people who are very much in the public eye, and that's been part of their journey too. And I think any of us who stand for something that's profound, there'll be a consciousness that isn't in agreement. I've had a little bit of that, and I honor that and stay true to the vision and the mission.
And that is that you are a perfect and whole, complete human being. You are beautiful. You are brilliant. You are here on purpose with purpose. Thank you. Thank you, TJ, for being the visionary who stepped out on the skinny branch and said, we're going conscious recovery here, folks. We are going curiosity. We are going strategies. We are going emergence. We are going next level recovery of your authentic self.
Wow. I'm so honored. Thank you, Wendy. And thank you for this beautiful platform where we can have these conversations.
You're so welcome. I appreciate you. And I'm so grateful for the work that you're doing and for the absolute 100% stand that you are taking so that people can have a new vision for their life, so that they can put down the substances and the processes that get in the way of their free and full self-expression.
Thank you.
Have a wonderful, wonderful emergence this coming October 13 and 14. And I love you.
Love you too. Thank you.
Peace and blessings.